Hey everyone, welcome to Working Forward. I'm Izzy Cannell.
And I'm Brad Golden. We're the Workplace Insights team here at VergeSense, and your co-hosts of Working Forward. This is where we share stories and forward-thinking ideas with people who are shaping the future of the workplace. Working Forward unites the global workplace community through inspiring conversations with the people driving change by sharing ideas you can act on today and revisit whenever you need a little spark. Today, we're joined by Massella Dukuly, the head of workplace strategy and innovation at Charter. Massella advises executives on hybrid policy, leadership training, AI adoption, and the future of workplace strategy.
We get into why workplace change so often goes wrong, what leaders can do better to connect vision with employee reality, and how data and storytelling can bridge that gap.
Massella, thank you so much for joining us today. If you don't mind, can we just start out by what exactly is your role at Charter? And tell us a little bit about your career path, about how you got to be at Charter today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brad and Izzy. So my role, as you mentioned, is head of workplace strategy and innovation, but we keep it short. But so Charter, for anybody who's not familiar, is a future of work media and research organization. And we have a flagship newsletter that goes out to over 100,000 subscribers. And we also have a membership that's geared and focused for people leaders very much in sort of like their practical day to day. And there's an advisory practice that's connected to that. That's what I lead. But my work is kind of a bunch of different things. On one hand, I get to support our editorial team and sort of thinking about what is the most important topic, what is the most practical takeaways, considering that they haven't necessarily been workplace practitioners, leaders, and managers in their own domains, but they're journalists at heart. And our goal is to make sure that what we're really putting out to our audience feels like tangible and makes them the smartest person in the room. And then on the other side of it, with clients, advising them on a range of things like Brad has just mentioned. So sometimes that is hybrid work. That's changed a little bit now. It's less concerned about where people are working, but how people are working, especially when we think about AI adoption. And then a range of different things. So an example of this would be, we've had clients come to us and say that, hey, we want to lead the charge when it comes to menopausal leave in the US, which is really a rare thing here. And so our goal is to sort of do some research, understand like what the landscape looks like, support them. And then, of course, right now it is a lot of AI adoption. What do we do? What does it look like? A quick spoiler alert. Nobody's like getting it right or getting it perfect, even if you work at an AI company. So there's just a lot that we can all be learning. And the separate thing that I do beyond what's happening at Charter at large, we were recently acquired in July by the San Francisco Standard. And so I've taken on a little bit of an internal role, which is team enablement, which is supporting our like performance and culture and really just building an infrastructure that allows us to show up and do the best work possible. But beyond that, I represent the brand in different ways. And so podcasts and facilitation, moderation, hosting a number of roundtable dinners and breakfasts is the core of my work. But yeah, that's a lot of work. We try to break it up so it looks like different things in different seasons. I'll just say that.
You certainly sound busy.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the holidays. I feel like it'll be calm for like 2.5 weeks. I'll be happy with that.
We can all hope.
Yeah.
It's funny to think that there's going to be some sort of break around the holidays. Like, I feel like usually people are kind of like, oh man, the holidays are going to be so hectic, but it's...
Yeah. I mean, a girl can dream, or like better said, it's probably a girl can dream and a girl should have some boundaries, but working on that.
Yeah. We're all...
You also asked about how I got here. So I'll say this. I am a startup masochist in that like my whole career has been startup. So prior to Charter and much earlier on, I worked at Warby Parker. I think I was like employee number, 60 something there. So this is before, I will tell you, I went there after college and my parents were like, you're going to sell glasses online? Like, what are you doing? Are you okay? Like, we've spent all this money for you to go to college and this is what you're going to do with your life. But what I will say is I remember applying to a bunch of jobs and I told myself that originally I wanted to be a psychologist. And I said, before I go off and do that work, I want to just spend a year working. Like, I need to take a mental break. It's funny now because I look back and I'm like, I was literally fine. But I just was like, I need a break. I need a year. And anyway, applying to a bunch of jobs, my roommate at the time was interviewing at GQ, and he was like, "Oh, I heard about this cool glasses brand that was like, in our magazine, and they have an ad, and they have 100,000 person waiting list for these $99 glasses." And I was like, "That sounds cool." And I went onto LinkedIn, and at the time, people didn't use LinkedIn in the way that they did today. So I found a recruiter who worked there, and I was like, "Hey, I would like a job at Warby Parker. Like, here's all my information. Reach out." And it's funny because this person now has told me in the past, he's like, "I don't know why I replied to you, but I did." And we connected, and I went there, and it was just such a shift from the other companies that I had been applying to. And again, like we're talking, 2010, 2011, 2012. I'm like, just, I'm applying a bunch of random jobs, but they were very formal, very sort of professional. There was just this sort of like, I'm here for a year, but like no real investment. But I walked into that building. It was the Puck building in New York City, if anybody's familiar. And I was just like, wow, all these people seem happy. Like they seem happy to be at work. And that was really cool to me. And thankfully I did get the job, and it just sort of transformed my perspective on what work could be. And so that is kind of the red thread in how I thought about workplaces and what I thought the work I could do would mean. And from there, I decided I wanted to go and get my MBA. I was very inspired by sort of like, early startup tech culture. At the time, everything was like the Warby Parker of. And so, that got me sort of into the mode. I started working at Squarespace. I was very early on there too, before they were really big. And then my experiences at both companies, actually, there was a small leadership development company or training company that many people now know is called Life Labs Learning. We'd have these trainings, and I've always been growing up sort of like a teacher's pet. So I'd be like, I know the answer to that question. Like, I want to talk about it. But I loved like what we were learning. And it just felt like, man, these are the things I should have learned in school, like how to communicate with people, how to give effective feedback, how to actually ask useful questions. And once I was sort of wrapping up my MBA, I was like, I need to find a role that sort of really matches my interests. And I reached out to the founder there because I'd been working with her so often at both of these companies, just in manager trainings. I was like, hey, I don't know if I'm qualified, but I have my MBA now. I know a lot about startups, and I think I really understand like what it means to be a great leader. I'm not saying that I do it perfectly all the time, but conceptually I get it, and I would love to do this work. And so I ended up starting a role there, and the, sort of end game of that is that I ended up training over 10,000 leaders, over 400 different companies in my time there. And it led me to Charter, just in that I was in a community of women early pandemic, and I met Erin Grau, who is one of the co-founders, and we really connected just over the work we were doing. But she saw how I facilitated conversations, and so she was like, we need to have you on this team. It didn't happen right away, but over time, I found that like Charter was the right place for me. And so now I get to sort of combine a lot of what I do with a lot of variety and excitement, like what I've just explained in terms of my role. And that is how I'm here. But again, the red thread is that I really care about work being a place. Like we spend the majority of our life at work, and actually it's going to increase because the most of us will need to work. And so I think that there's a real sort of mandate on those of us in the workplace space to be thoughtful about what we contribute to the workplace and how we empower people to make sure that work doesn't suck. It shouldn't have to. It really shouldn't. We're all adults. Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved something you said when you were talking about Warby Parker. You brought up, the idea of what work could be and having this feeling of what work could be. And I personally have had an experience at a company where it truly changed my life. It helped teach me boundaries. It helped teach me prioritization. Like it built those life skills in addition to hard skills, and having that realization of like, wow, work can be like this, and we're having fun, and there's a community here. Anyways, I know we're going to get into all sorts of topics around what work can be, but I really loved just the way you framed that.
Yeah. And, as we jump into some topics here, like it'd be interesting for us, there's a gravity problem and in the industry, and it's called change, right? And change is never ending. Like we can't get rid of it. It's only accelerating. And even as you're describing, like, the concept of Warby Parker, it being kind of a novel idea or kind of an outlandish idea way back. And now we think about Warby Parker, we're like, duh, like that's so obvious that it's a successful company, right? But there was something that you also spoke about at Warby Park, and what Izzy was kind of hinting at is like this kind of intangible feeling that you had, like this vibe that was happening at Warby Parker that drew you into that, and then you wanted it pulled you into, exploring that even further. And we come across so many customers that are looking to kind of tap into that. And, there's like, obviously we're well versed in the quantitative side, but there's like this qualitative element or lens to how people are experiencing work. Let's talk about like change management. Like, what does that look like, or how have you seen that evolved since 2020?
So last night, actually, I was hosting or facilitating a roundtable dinner with some HR execs, and somebody at the table had shared that they had seen a recent stat that change management initiatives in workplaces are failing more than they have been in the past like 15 years.
Wow.
And I knew that they weren't good, but I didn't know that they were even worse. And it's really fascinating to me because I, want to pause and sort of think about like why that might be. And I think there are a number of reasons. First, I think people are under tremendous stress. Like, it is not so interesting that we kind of avoid it. I don't know. I guess it is just like social suppression. Like, we're all doing it. Everybody needs a group therapist to be like, it's okay to say the past 5-6 years have been wild, but everyone's like just coping and focusing and figuring it out, whatever they need to in the moment. And that's understandable. We need to survive. But I think it's just been really stressful. There's been rapid change. And one thing that I really feel, and I think it's been fascinating to sort of think about, is like just the exposure that we have to information, whether it is at work, on LinkedIn, Instagram, the news, whatever. I don't know that we're designed for this much information all of the time. And so I think people are like shutting down in ways, and shutting down in the sense that they are sort of planting their feet very firmly on the things that give them a sense of safety. And so it's like, I want to be me in this environment. This feels good to me. This feels comfortable. Even just the idea of traditionalism. And when I say that, I don't mean like, religion or ways of being, but I mean just like, it feels very safe and logical for me to behave the way that I would like to behave, the way that I think people have behaved prior to me. And then, of course, you have some people who are like fighting against the grain and they want more and they want different, and that's okay. But I just think that this sort of planting my feet on the ground, resisting change is sort of a way that we protect ourselves. So I think people are resisting what the environment is throwing at them, even if it's happening subconsciously. In addition to that, I do think some of this fear shows up in different ways. So when you look at leaders, there has been a resistance. I think something that's fascinating to me, and has been fascinating, especially as we think about, and I'm sure this is data that you all have seen at VergeSense, is like, this sort of like, we're getting back to how work was. I'm like, 2019 is over. Like, we have to let it go. It's like people keep trying to go back to this time that just like, it's almost not real. It's like looking back at like, a relationship that you had when you were 15 and like glorifying it. And,
Totally.
It's this like clawing away. Like, I think people are just so like, whatever thing that they can hold on tight to is the thing that they want. And it makes them really haphazard in their approach when it comes to change. They're not considerate of other people's feelings. They're unable to listen. They're unable to sort of ground the facts of why the change is happening. It's just, let's do what we think used to work. And so all of that to name that, I think we're overwhelmed. I think we're holding on tight. And I think that we haven't sort of paused to recognize that change in the past hasn't necessarily been that successful anyway. And we are at a really pivotal moment where we have to stop, take a deep breath and say, what do we learn from what hasn't worked? And how do we progress forward, knowing that the world is changing and also that people and their desires are changing too?
Yeah, I'm curious to get it.
Go for it, Izzy.
Yeah, I'm curious getting into that. You talked a little bit about kind of the personal level of resistance to change, right, that we're seeing, and the valid reasons that is happening for people. There's just so much out there. I'm curious to get a little bit into when a change initiative fails, what does that actually mean for the organization? Like, what is the impact on the organization?
Yeah. So change initiatives failing can mean a bunch of different things. So like you said, we'll start with impact. First, I think there's what can be assumed, which is distrust. If you present information one way, especially at a workplace, right, where there is desired, or at least a desire from most, to want to trust their leadership, to want to trust that there's a direction that we're going into. When that doesn't seem like there's some dissonance between, ideal and reality, I think people are like, should I trust this? And it's normal. Like, that's a very human response. And then I think what happens is if distrust lingers for too long, people become disengaged, people become skeptical, people feel like, well, now I have to advocate for myself. And we see this. The last Edelman Trust Barometer that went out earlier this year showed that for the first time ever, we're seeing a decrease in how much people in general trust their employer. So for a long time, we've seen the trend where there's a distrust in media, there's a distrust in government. But now at the workplace level, people are like, well, I'm not really sure like what you stand for. Do you really stand for me? And so there are a lot of assumptions that come from things failing. And I want to also just say that it's not that we can't make mistakes, but I think it's the ownership. I think what happens is change fails and we either, brush it under the rug, or we pretend it hasn't happened, or we say, well, actually, we'll just scrap it and we'll try something else without really kind of giving life to the fact that this should be a learning opportunity. And I think that's where the missed opportunity really is.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's so many points here that are resonating with me in terms of just like the human experience and, what we crave as people. And I think that sometimes gets lost in when we're talking about the design of the workplace or the experience of the workplace. Izzy and myself, we visit a number of clients, and there's clients that have done a ton of programming and put all this work into creating these beautiful spaces. And then people just don't know how to use the space, which sounds kind of absurd, but they literally don't have any idea of like, oh, there's this beautiful, like kind of open lounge area. Is it acceptable or appropriate for me to go and like chill out there?
Yeah.
And I think without really having that guidance, or connecting with the people that are occupying that space and understanding their human needs, there's a strong disconnect there that, obviously has a huge impact into the business. I wonder if we could, and we don't need to go to solutions yet, but more so like the slice of, I know Charter, you guys just had like a phenomenal like conference, and
Yeah.
I attended online, and
Awesome.
and the theme around AI was quite heavy, and I'm kind of curious, how are people missing or what's the misstep there as far as like addressing AI as a tool in organizations?
Yeah. So Brad, I think you're totally right. I think what you're naming about people almost like having a problem, creating a solution, but not like it's almost like they haven't paused to evaluate what question or what problem they're actually solving. And then like how they, share that information or share the solutions to their team is kind of what is off. But when we think about AI, like that is happening with AI. And I think it is a big change management issue at large. So AI is a tool, like you've just said, like AI is a tool, and it is a tool that I think can really amplify all of the really wonderful things that we do as human beings. But I think where we are missing people or making the wrong turn is that people aren't even really sure what they're solving for. So right now, I feel like there's a big pressure for people to take AI usage within an organization and see ROI. So I'm hearing leaders being like, we're done with experimentation. Who are we cutting? Do we actually need these jobs? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hold on. Do you even know? Like the big question is like, what should you even be using AI for? And I think the bigger question, which is even harder to answer, is like, what shouldn't you be using AI for? Before you think about cutting people's roles or redesigning your org, you kind of want to understand those things. And that's why I say, like, I don't think anybody's like perfectly got this down pat, but I think people are feeling this, again, uncertainty that's humming in our environment. Then within their own organizations, change has already been messy. And then they're like, AI is supposed to help us. Let it be the solve. It would be like, I can't get, from my home to work. And instead of getting a car, you're like, let me get a private jet. And I'm not saying that the private jet couldn't be useful, but then you'd have to understand, like, I probably don't need it to get to like 10 miles down the road. I think that that's the big thing. It's not understanding what we're solving for. And it's also not taking accountability of where we've gone wrong. That seems to really be sort of mixing people up. And then I think there's also a little bit of like FOMO that's happening, looking at other people, assuming in truth, just because I hear more of this, assuming that they're doing more than they're actually doing. And even if they're doing a lot, you got to really look at their capacity. You got to make sure it's aligned with you. Sometimes it's truly apples and oranges, and discerning, does that make sense? And really listening to your people so that you can understand how AI can actually work best within your environment.
Yeah, it's a good call out. That AI hype is so real. Like people just
Yeah.
look around and like, oh, so and so's doing this, we need to do this, and then it just kind of snowballs, and yeah.
Exactly.
I think there's been a lot more conversation the last couple of months about, the challenge of replacing a bad human workflow with a bad AI workflow, right?
Yes.
And I think we all see it all the time. We're like
Oh, yeah.
trying to learn how to use these tools. We're trying to maybe use the wrong AI tools to do something new because it's the only one we have access to, or it's the only one we've ever used, right? I'm certainly, my default is like, okay, I'm going to go to, one of the chat tools for this and see what it can do. But there's probably a purpose-built tool that can help me a lot better and do that workflow better, right? So, I think that's another interesting, um, I think hurdle that every company is facing right now, and there's just a lot of unknowns for all of us employees that are just trying to, do the best
Yeah.
with our day.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you another example. So at the summit that we just had, we had Jamie Teven, who is the chief scientist at Microsoft. And so she's deep into this work. And one of the concepts that she addressed, and one that we've all sort of like heard buzzing around, is this idea of like slop and work slop. And her response to this was like, don't blame me, like at Microsoft, like blame yourself. Again, when we don't have an awareness of what we're trying to solve for, in fairness, right? Like it's okay that we're experimenting with tools and deciding what works. For example, somebody might say, I use ChatGPT for most things, but when I'm doing research, I'll go to Perplexity. Great, but that's something that you want to learn. But what happens in terms of this like framing of work slop is like we take everything that we've got in us, all our questions, like it's so disorganized, and we throw it into this LLM. And then we take that sort of sloppy work and we throw it at another colleague and we expect them to do the work to clean it up. Whether it's something that we've written, something that we're thinking about, like it's not really thoughtful. And so right now, I think AI has been so individualized, even when we're thinking about it from a team perspective. And I think the next sort of step for us, and Jamie talked about this, is like instead of focusing on what can it individually do for me, we need to look at our teams. How are our teams functioning? What is the health of our team? What's working? What's not working? And then how can we set AI up to support the team? It is about the team. That's how we're going to use it more frequently in work. And of course, it'll be built into everything that we do. But it just really reminded me, like, I'm like, you're totally right. Like AI for me is like a dumping ground, and that's great. But, even here at Charter, we have talked from an editorial perspective. We've talked about like, sometimes not necessarily internally, but somebody will reach out and say, hey, I have this thing. And it's like very clear that they've used AI, and there's no shame about that. But then the thing is like, you took 2 seconds to write this, and then you want somebody to spend time editing it to come to this clean idea. And like how fair, unfair is that when we think about how we use the tool and how we use it as colleagues?
And I think going back to that problem statement, like if we look at like just taking notes in general, and by the way, I wanted to be a psychologist at one point too. So like I kind of think about things in this way, but
yeah,
I'm forgetting the bias right now, but there's a phenomenon of when we take photos of things, we tend to not remember them as clearly because we have this psychological kind of laziness where my phone's got it or my camera's got it. So I don't have to fully immerse myself in this experience. And I feel like the same thing is true when it comes to like note taking. Like if I have a note taker running in the background, I kind of become lazy in my active listening. Whereas like, and I think Izzy and I kind of both practice this, we actively try to take notes during the call, and that way it kind of resonates. And then it's kind of like the active listening thing. But it's going back to, again, like what is it exactly that you're trying to solve specifically around the notes, right? Like maybe there was something that I missed. So using the tool in the sense of like combing through it and making sure that I have all the points on my active listening notes. Did I miss anything? Add those, kind of be, complementary to what I'm already doing, and then go ahead and in real language, drop that into Slack in a summary that people can understand. So, and that AI.
I'm the worst at this. Yeah.
You are?
I'm the worst. Well, no, I'm the worst at like, this is one of those, like, I'm so resistant to the note takers. I'm like, and pen in hand, my paper, I'm typing it into Slack after, because I'm just so, that's how I remember it.
Right.
I'm like, I don't care. The note taker can be on the call, but I'm so resistant to using that as my tool. And at the same time, I totally agree with Brad on kind of the quality there isn't always.
Yeah.
So tools are evolving. It's going to get better and different. But at the same time, there is this element of it that's like, I might never have had exposure to any of that if the note taker wasn't in that room, right? Like it might not be the highest quality. And yet now I'm reading through this thing that I may never have, had exposure to at all. And so there is the dissemination of some level of information that I think is an interesting part of that. But yeah, I'm like, I need some change management over here. I'm so
No, but I love that you both are saying this because like even Brad, as you started talking, I was thinking, I'm so impressed you even look at the notes because what happens is for so many people, the notes just like are out in the ether. I'm like all of the like gibberish that we're all saying in meetings all the time are somewhere in a cloud. And it's not to say that we don't look at them, but again, like think about all the barriers to entry. So one, it's like, oh, okay, we're busy. Like, and if you weren't there and there wasn't necessarily like an urgent reason for you to be there, maybe you're not prioritizing reading the notes. And then let's say you do actually need to read the notes. You see that it's a mess. You have to do all this mental gymnastics to figure it out. So if there's no interest, people are not reading it, they're not decoding it, but the two of you are like, I value actually hearing what happened. And then you're doing something that then makes it easier for other people to grasp. And that's great. But then I wonder how much time is that taking? And instead of just having a note taker, what can we do a little bit more thoughtfully in terms of finding, to your point, the technology will evolve and there are some that are better, but it's like, could I find a tool that actually does the specific thing instead of just a full transcript? Is it just, here are the specific takeaways? And yes, these things exist, but again, I think people just get so excited about like, my note taker's on versus what is the note taker actually trying to accomplish? Not every meeting needs a full transcript. It just doesn't.
Yeah. Well, this is a great segue into talking about, communication and like the role of communication. And specifically, like kind of bridging the gap between the leadership's vision and like the employee experience.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, what's your take on this? Like, what is the role in communicating or bridging that gap right now from, the leadership?
So I think right now the skills that leaders really need to have when it comes to translating, communicating vision comes down to one, modeling, and then two, storytelling. So and I put modeling before storytelling, even though in theory the storytelling probably comes before the modeling, but I think it's a virtuous cycle in that you have to be able to present a message that is compelling to people. You also have to understand that people have different stakes. Some people are at organizations because it deeply aligns with like things that they are passionate about and excited about or their talent and their skills. And some people are like, this is a great stable job that allows me to live the life that I want and take care of my family and feed myself, etc. But I think it's much bigger than that. Like, especially in our world today where the financial and economic side of things are tricky. Like, companies are not just handing out the biggest raises and bonuses. And, we're in that time of year where I think for some, the feeling is like more lackluster than what we'd ideally hope for. And so we have to create that sense of certainty and motivation for people beyond just money. And that is helping them feel like they are part of something that's bigger, helping them feel like they are part of something that's moving forward or going somewhere. And again, I think the storytelling aspect, what is this? Why are we doing it? Why does it matter? Who's part of it? What is your role within what we're doing is going to be so, so important. But it can't just be the story. They need to feel like you also are part of this, especially when it comes to that what, like what's happening. Do we see modeled behavior? So it's one thing to say this is the most important work that we'll ever do and blah, blah, blah. But then they see that you're never present. Or then they see that like you prioritize yourself over the goals that you've said were important, or you actually dismiss other people and you don't listen to them, etc. So I think it's two things. Like, can you help people understand the vision? Can you help them see themselves in the vision? Can you help them understand how to be part of it very practically? And then also, are you essentially walking the talk?
Yeah. We see this disconnect happen in a lot of different ways, and specifically around like policy and like, the expectation of people showing up for the office. And so there'll be companies that deploy a policy of a minimum of 3 days a week, right? And then their leaders are not showing up. And then the people are frustrated and they're like, well, why do we have to show up? On the other side of it, we're seeing, I think it was yesterday we were talking to a customer. And they had said that there's like a mandatory like 2 days a week, but their leaders are actually required to be in 3 days a week. And so their leaders actually have a higher expectation of showing up. I'm wondering, what have you seen go right as far as like communicating around policy? Like I think there's a number of examples of what's gone wrong. There's a
Yeah.
lot of clickbait out there, but what has gone right now in terms of like communicating policy?
Yeah. So I think it's really important. There's a framework. Also, I'll just say these frameworks all exist out in the world. I'm sure, again, an LLM could like spit it out to us in different ways, but this is one that is most familiar to me just because of how it was framed. So I think it's exactly. So when I was at Life Labs, we taught a leading change workshop. There's sort of a bit of a formula for it. And like the first part of it was just sort of about really like inoculating essentially. I think when you are leading change or helping people understand policy or whatever thing that you're trying to like launch, it's important to address the things or concerns that matter to them. So for example, if I'm launching a new hybrid work policy where I'm saying we're going to be in the office 3 or 4 days a week, I'm going to say, hey, and let's assume, this group of people weren't prior to this. Hey, I know this is a difference from how we've been working. We've been working from home primarily, or there's been flexibility in terms of who comes into the office, when, and where. And I want to name this because it might feel like a shock. It might feel a little uncomfortable. It might not feel ideal to some of you. That being said, and so I'll stop right there, but like that framing of it is really important. If people don't feel like you get them, they shut down immediately. So all the other like things that you're going to say after that kind of mean nothing depending on who's willing or open. But I think it's important to say, like, I know this might be uncomfortable. I know this might be hard. There's some honesty in that. And I think sometimes, just to quickly speak about what goes wrong, it's sort of like, you're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. Like you just won $1 gazillion. And everyone's like, that's literally not what happened, but thank you. So they shut and they just don't even want to hear it. But from there, the next thing that I think is really important is this combination of heart and head. I find that when leaders are successful, they are combining both aspects. So heart, what is the vision? Hey, again, a first statement. I know this is going to be kind of different or jarring in comparison to what we've done before. Heart, the vision is that we all get to work together a little bit more closely. So the time that we spend in office is going to be used to collaborate, to connect with one another, to actually like launch projects. Yes, you'll still work independently because that's fundamental to the work that we do. But again, like you're shaping a little bit of the vision. Why are we doing it? And you could put heart before head, but I think heart generally can sort of shape it. Head then is the data. Why does this matter? And ideally you have data that says that, hey, in the past month, we actually haven't been as productive. Here are what those numbers look like. Or on the flip side, actually people really have enjoyed getting together and it's made us feel much more engaged. We've been able to accomplish X, Y, and Z. So you are combining both the vision and the stats that help people feel grounded in the thing that you're asking them to do. The next thing is like a next step. Maybe it's asking people to share feedback. Tell me what you think about this. My favorite approach in something like this is like, look, the change is happening. This is something that we feel is best for the organization, best for the team. That said, we want to co-create this with you. What would make it 10% better? And because that's the thing, like, sometimes if you're like, so what do you want instead? People are like, I want to work from home. Could be, that maybe that's not what they're saying, but that could be. And what's really hard about that is your answer is no. And so you were never in a good position to actually move forward. Instead, let's think about it in sort of meaningful, small ways that people can feel part of the plan. And then I think from there, the other thing that's really helpful is when you are leading change and communicating change, setting sort of change trial periods, pilots, if you will. It doesn't have to be like a full on, like we're only trying it with one group, but it's like 30 days from now, let's check in and see how people are feeling. These are the things we're going to measure. But I think it's just about giving some autonomy back to the people who are involved in the change. People don't, people, yes, we resist change, but I think it's more about resisting change being forced upon us rather than disliking the change altogether.
Everything you just said makes so much sense, right? It's like, well, this feels like the obvious path.
Yeah.
What is it that, like, what are the blockers? Why are organizations not doing these things? Is it because they don't have the right resources? Is it because they've never done change? It's hard to believe a company hasn't done change management after everything we went through as a, global community the last 5 years. But what are the blockers to companies doing these things? Because they do, um, they feel like supportive
Yeah.
actions. They feel like, yeah, like I said, it just feels like obvious, right? Like when you
Yeah.
say it, let's let's go.
Yeah. I'm like, duh, why not? Yeah. Well, okay, Izzy, I'll say this, and I mean it so respectfully, but like common sense isn't so common.
Of course.
And I don't mean that in like a disparaging way. What I just mean is that so often organizations take on cultures of their own. So if change has looked a certain way over a certain time and it's worked, and when I say worked, that doesn't mean it's successful or effective. But if somebody somewhere thinks this is how we do it here, that thing is bound to continue. And it can happen not necessarily in terms of the change overall, it can happen in unique dynamics. So that could be, your team or your workplace team feeling uncomfortable giving feedback to their senior leadership because they've been shot down a bunch of times. So they know it's not going to work, but they're like, not even worth the headache. Those types of things over time, I think, can cause barriers to actually doing the right things. The other thing that I think stands in the way is time and resources. So often teams are small. So often teams just like don't have the energy. Like, one thing that I have talked about so often with clients and came up a lot at this dinner that we did last night, it's just that like people are so exhausted and they're just like, man, I know that there's like a right way to do this thing, but I just don't want to do all the interviews. I just don't want to do all the other things. And then there's pressure. Faster, more, better, as if like, time is running out. And I guess, yeah, time is moving, but we have so much more to lose if we're not thoughtful about it. So there's all of those things. And the last thing I'll just name is ego. I think sometimes, and I see that ego in general is seeming to like we're almost going back to that. I think we have over-indexed in some ways on the like care and showing up for everybody's needs and what's the specific thing. Like it's not realistic when you have a large body of employees. And when I say large body, that could even be 10 people. I can't meet everyone's needs. We have to come to consensus to some degree. And then also most of us are for-profit businesses that have to kind of figure out like where the line is. But I think many leaders, some of them unfortunately, feel this sort of pressure of being pushed around. And so they're over-indexing on like this brute force. We do it because I say we do it. And we're just seeing that on so many layers, from government on down, that like, this is how we should do this thing. And so I'm hopeful that like we sort of find balance and equilibrium. But right now, I think people are exercising their right to say, it's my company, it should look like this, without considering the people who actually make it a reality.
Yeah. My mind is going all over the place right now, I think. But there's these companies that, they do the Taco Tuesday, and kind of listening to what you're talking about, some of the conversations that you're having at that dinner of people just being kind of stressed out and wanting a quick fix, and then they hear about this cool idea that so-and-so is doing about Taco Tuesday at their company, so let's go ahead and try that for our company.
Yeah.
And now, maybe they're in a place that just doesn't have good tacos, or like people just don't care for tacos, which I don't know if those people exist.
Hate them. Not our people.
What was interesting is that, I was speaking with a client like 6 months ago, and we were looking at the data, and this was like a global portfolio manager, and this was a London location, and they saw that there was like this real big spike on like 10 o'clock on Thursdays, and they didn't really understand why.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that there's like this beautiful market that's adjacent to this building. And so people are really drawn just naturally to come into this building because of Thursday, that there's this market that is just kind of, it's been there for a long time, always has been there, but the global portfolio manager didn't necessarily have that context. So we had to go to the local facility manager and kind of explore, well, what's going on here? And it was ingrained or embedded in that culture already. It already existed. Yeah. And there's all these like kind of really beautiful things that do exist, and like kind of these, nuanced areas of people's workplaces, and even within a building too, you can see that occurring. So I don't know. I guess my point is that it's kind of interesting because sometimes when we try so hard to just kind of replicate or see something cool, it doesn't usually work out. And to your point earlier of like getting to the ethos or what is it that your employees or what your company stands for, how do we really, embrace that and
Yeah.
celebrate that? So,
Yeah. You have to know yourself. You have to know yourself. And I think, you know, a skill that's going to be really important for leaders going forward, and I think for all employees, is curiosity and discernment. So curious enough to explore and determine like what might be right. Maybe it's tacos, maybe it's pasta, maybe it's, I don't know, whatever people are into. And then discernment to say like, does that thing actually work here? I think when we get overzealous and assume that everything is a, one size fit or just a band-aid fix, we miss again like the original problem. Because ironically, right, people try to use tacos and ping pong tables, and I think we're getting away from that. But as we see people thinking about, let's say, just like office design in general, they get all excited about all these things, and I'm like, but you're not solving for hunger. People didn't say that they were hungry. People didn't say that they wanted to play a game at work. What they said was that it was hard to communicate. So is it that we need better structure around communication? And one thing I'll say too, just in my work, especially during the pandemic, so many people were, of course, shifting to remote work for the first time ever, like hadn't even thought about it, wild, crazy idea. And they were like, man, we were just so much better in person. And I was like, I actually don't think that you were. I think that you were like hiding behind something. There was somebody who was picking up extra legwork and extra debt for poor communication or ineffective practices or policies that didn't quite make sense, but you saw each other enough, so you kind of like worked through it. But in a virtual or hybrid environment, it's a lot harder to actually do that. So the cracks come to the surface. And again, the same thing we saw with many people with relationships, right? It's like, I thought that like we really loved each other. And I'm like, yeah, but then when you actually have to talk to them all the time, it's a totally different thing. And it really just gets down to, I think, pausing, taking some real inventory, checking in. And I'm not saying this is like we overhaul it all, right away. But I think even just starting with curiosity, like, am I solving for the right thing right now? Is a really great question to start with for anything and everything. Communication, how many days you're in the office, what's in your office, how you communicate, what are you solving for? And I think you'd be surprised at how it impacts your strategy and your approach.
Yeah, that's great. And I think but the reflection, we've talked about how busy we are, but that time for reflection is so important, especially from a leadership level, right? Being able to ask those questions of who are we, what do we need, what our employees need. I'm curious, we haven't talked quite as much about what role employees play in shaping the workplace. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I don't want to say this is a hot take because maybe it's not. And I also feel like, I don't know if it's that hot. I think it's kind of fair. I'm like, we're adults. Like we're
warm.
We love hot takes.
Sort of warm, maybe hot, depending on how you're feeling on it, but look, here's what I'll say. I think that, again, I think there's been a big pendulum swing where in this past several years, you couldn't find an organization that wasn't like, our employees, they're so important. Like, here's our Instagram and our blah, blah, blah. Like the whole thing, all about, the employer brand. And that's important. It's so true. I'm not saying that we should get rid of that. But I think we have to remember that we are hiring adults. And so again, what is the problem that we are solving for? So from an employee perspective, I think employees need to say, like, what am I solving for? I'm coming here because I want to work for a company that allows me to utilize the skills that matter to me. I'm coming here because I feel that this is gainful employment. I'm coming here because, I don't know, I'm going to be building a family and they have benefits that are actually going to allow me to do that effectively. There are so many different things. We all have different career priorities. So I think for employees, first and foremost, like, you need to assess what your career priorities are. If you are looking for a certain type of balance, if you are looking for a certain type of treatment or experience, like, you've got to know that. Because I think sometimes employees tend to go into workplaces unclear about what they want and then feeling really upset that they're not getting the thing that they weren't able to define in the first place. Again, like in any relationship, like, I wanted you to be nicer. And it's like, well, you never said that, and not even to yourself. So we have to get realistic about what we want. And then I think secondarily, we have to start asking questions as employees about what am I willing to actually contribute to this environment? It can't just be all what the employer is giving. Like, am I a person who's willing to give feedback? Like, sure, they have to create the conditions to make it safe or at least allow you to be brave. But at the same time, you have to like feel like you play a role too. It can't be passive. That's what workplaces are. They are communities. And I think when we sort of sit back and say like, do everything for me, solve everything for me, it becomes really challenging. And I think also just a framework in general is that like your workplace is not supposed to solve all of your problems. It just cannot. Like we've got friends and family and therapists and so on and so forth for those reasons. And what's really tricky from the employee perspective is that for the past several years, I think that the public sector has sort of failed us in terms of what they offer civilians and people. And so people are looking at their workplaces and saying, can you bridge the gap? They're looking and they're saying, eggs are so expensive. And then they're saying, so then give me a raise.
Yeah.
Employers are like, I know eggs are expensive. So is paying you. So are tariffs perhaps. So are this thing. Like, I can't control that. And so I think there's just something about having realistic expectations about like, what can my workplace actually give me? What am I really trying to solve for? And maybe you find a workplace that meets all those things, and sometimes they won't, right? Like sometimes your workplace will disappoint you and that happens. But I think this is where in any relationship we think about trust. What are the things that I need? Can I get clear with myself? Can I have meaningful conversations about, is that something that we can accomplish or not together? And then most of us are in at-will employment. If it's not right for you, I know the market's not so great, but like, then you start thinking like, well, what is my next opportunity look like? What are the things I'm going to ground myself in? So there's just some personal responsibility that I think employees have to put into this and know that like the employer can't do all. You have to be part of the equation.
It's such a great reminder. I think, it's very easy when you're in a cycle of maybe not being happy at work. It's so easy to blame the leadership or blame the company or blame the benefits. But have we really thought about, why am I here? Is it that it's not right for me anymore versus the leadership's doing something wrong, the business or the HR team, whatever it might be. Maybe it's both. I think a lot of times there's probably
a lot of times it is.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what's beautiful about it is like, it might not even be that, is it the right thing for me? But it's like, well, then what do I need? So for example, if you're sitting there and you're feeling overwhelmed, you're like, it's just that I don't really know what our goals are. Can someone tell me that? So you have to start getting curious about yourself and your needs and then thinking about how might I communicate that to people? And if you are communicating it and it's not landing, it's not getting anywhere, then that's where I think you start saying, all right, well, like, is this actually right? Because I think what we'll find is that people are so unique. People are so different. Some people thrive in the chaos of whatever. And I don't even know that they're thriving, but maybe it doesn't bother them as much. Are you a person who needs certain types of affirming and support? Or are you somebody who's like, doesn't really matter, like not the biggest deal in the world? But that's just a personal preference thing that we'll have to decide as individuals.
Are either of you two familiar with Esther Perel? Yeah. So what you're speaking about right now, I hadn't even thought about this as far as, because she speaks about, she's very keen on evaluating relationships and done a ton of research and work around looking at the dynamics of relationships. But she often talks about how we put so much pressure on our partners to be everything, all the things, right? And I hadn't even thought about, and something that you spoke about early on in this conversation of having access to so much information, it kind of then we project that into our workplace and our expectations of the workplace just needing to be anything and everything all at the same time. And so that was really a light bulb moment for me. Thank you for sharing that.
Of
Maybe
course.
we'll get Esther on next.
Yeah.
Do you think she'd come?
Like, can I just be in the background? I would love to be part of that.
That would be amazing.
But Brad, so something that you're bringing up, and this sort of like blew my mind when I heard it, but I think it speaks to all types of relationships. So I listen to all types of podcasts, listen to Esther and others. And so I was listening to this podcast. It's like a relationships and whatever. And this is a little bit of a hot take, just non-traditional, maybe. It's not a hot take, but it's non-traditional maybe in like what maybe the average person might be listening to.
The hot take, Massella.
You're right. I'm here.
Drop it.
I've arrived. But so the person who was being interviewed, which I'm not remembering their name, but they were talking about their very first experience being in like a polyamorous relationship. And they were like, I'm not somebody who would ever be part of something like this. I was surprised, but whatever. I met this person, we had this connection, and they said something to me that was so enlightening, and it changed my life. One, they're no longer with the person and realize that polyamorous relationships aren't for them, but they were like, I will take this with me into every relationship I ever have. So they start dating, and the person says to the woman in the relationship, he's like, hey, one thing that I really want to do is make you feel safe, because of course this is a dynamic that might not feel common for you. This is very different than what you're used to. And so when it comes to how we communicate with each other, what is the frequency, intensity, and cadence in which you need to connect? And it like blew my mind, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can think about times in romantic relationships, friendships, whatever, where I just like maybe didn't feel great or felt totally fine, and the other person didn't feel fine because we weren't aligned on those things. So frequency, how often do we need to talk? Intensity, is a 5-minute check-in like, hey, how was your day? Or do we need to talk for an hour about all of our life goals every moment? And then cadence, like, does it need to be multiple times a day? Can it be every other day? And it was just really interesting to me about the importance of making the implicit explicit. And I think the same thing stands at work. We have to be so good at saying, workplaces, here's what we can give you. Lay it out on the table. Whoever you are, be who you are. And my favorite example of like my career, I always like to tell people, I'm like, take Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is who they are. They say what they're like, here we are. We're open on some days. We're not open on all days. And like, you decide, does that work for you or no? Here's what we support. Here's what we don't support. Like, you get to decide, because all the information is there. And naturally, you're less mad. Same thing with the other party. Does this workplace work for me? Do I mind that I want Chick-fil-A on a Sunday? Can I deal with all the other things you have to decide. And so I think there's real power in naming the things that really trigger us. I think, unfortunately, sometimes we're not even good at coming down to articulate what it is. And I think it's just the habit of being like, I want to talk to this person more, or I need better direction, or I'm not understanding why that change is happening, and us getting really clear about communicating it.
Yeah. I know we have to wrap up, but I just have to say I love the parallels to your hot take here, to our CEO Dan Ryan's hot takes in our last episode, which were you've got options, right? Like a company has options, an employee has options, like just be who you are as far as choosing your policy, live it.
Yeah.
There are options out there, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up, Massella, thank you so much.
Thank
This was so
you.
much fun. We obviously could have kept going forever.
Yes.
Can you tell our listeners who want to keep up with your work where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Massella Dukuly. You'll see my name written somewhere, so you can make that easy. But you can also find my work at Charter. So we have a newsletter. It's charterworks.com/newsletter. You can sign up for free. And then we also have Charter Pro, which is a membership. Once you get to the newsletter, you'll have access to that. But yeah, I'm excited to support you all. So if you have a question or an idea or a thought, or you're like, you just don't agree with my hot takes, fine. But let me know. Like, let's talk about it. I'm open to that.
Well, Missa, thanks so much for bringing such an honest and nuanced perspective to the conversation. Curiosity is standing out to me. Boundaries also is another one that, I need to practice, I think, and everyone can do a little bit of practicing with that. But you gave us so many different frameworks, like going back and replaying this in my mind. There's all these little nuggets that you dropped here that I think will be valuable to everyone. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.
Yeah, if for everyone listening, maybe take a step back, reflect a little bit, think about your expectations of yourself and of your workplace, and maybe that's a simple place to start.
Yeah, totally agree. Like, what are your expectations? Do a little inventory, what's working, what's not working, and then find tacos or your other desired craving. That helps. It always helps.
And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your team or with that colleague who's always pushing for better ways of working.
We'll be back soon with more conversations like this. Until then, keep learning, keep adapting, and keep working forward.